Welcome back to the latest Written on the Pitch, starring Jessica Charman. How are you, Jess?
Doing well, thank you. How about yourself, Jason?
Doing good. We've got some SheBelieves Cup to talk about. The tournament is over. The United States won it as we predicted. Not really like we were out on a limb or anything here. When you look at the competition, that was what was supposed to happen. We'll talk about what we learned from it. We'll talk about some of the branding around the tournament as well. And then we've got some questions from the listeners to finish off. But let's start with the tournament that wrapped up last night. U.S. wins after a 6-0 win over Argentina. We'll kind of go through the teams a little bit and what we learned across the board. We talked about this on this morning's Soccer Down Here show. I feel like something that I want to do, because I want to learn more, is about all the other teams in the world, and especially the teams that we're going to see in the Olympics this summer. Who are the contenders? Who is growing? Who is trying to hold their footing? Who's trying to hold their place in the world's game? We always talk about the U.S. here, but not much about everybody else. So let's start with everybody else. Let's start with Argentina. They were competitive.
You know what? Yeah, that's what I was going to say. When you think about Argentina, bar yesterday, I think we wipe out yesterday, right? Because 6-0, tough, real tough. But when you look at the two other games against two pretty established nations in Canada and Brazil, they really kept their foot in. They played well. The 4-1 result in the first game of the tournament flattered Brazil as far as I'm concerned. We were texting during that one. Argentina had a lot of ability. I just don't know if they had the fitness, the conditioning, and once it started to drop against them, that was when you saw a bit of a mentality change.
They need more. They need more investment. They need, I think, new ideas, although for a lot of the conversation, and we'll get into it here in just a second about the Argentine program, because there's a lot of debate and there's a lot of narrative about what's going on with Argentina. They don't have all of their best players because of some issues internally. But I thought it was pretty clear watching them. They wanted to play good soccer. They wanted to build out of the back. They also understood that they were overmatched in terms of quality. But they didn't just resort to everybody behind the ball, just hoof it long and see what happens. They tried to play.
Yeah, and I remember tweeting during that match, the first match, how much I respected that. Because with a lot of teams, when you know you're the underdog, you park the bus, you play ugly play, you clear the ball long at every opportunity, you just try and get numbers back behind the ball. They didn't do that. They continued to try and build out from the back. They had an inexperienced goalkeeper, and yet she was still trying to find the right passes. She was attempting to be comfortable with the ball at her feet. It was good, and they got a well-deserved goal in that match. Ended up being their only goal of the tournament, but they had potential going forward. And one player that was really exciting was Yamila Rodriguez. We were texting about her, how exciting she was down the flank, and players like that who play their soccer in Argentina at Boca Juniors, that's exciting for the country.
It's a complicated situation with the Argentine program because of a storyline that I don't know if it really got a lot of play on the broadcasts, and some have said it needed more. I think it's maybe a little complex to explain. It's probably going to be a little complex for us to fully explain. But Carlos Bordecho, the manager, he had been there from 98 to 2012. Then he left and he went to manage the women's team at UAI Urquiza, which has one of the stronger women's programs in Argentina. He came back in 2017 to the federation and to the national team. And after the World Cup in 2019, there was criticism of his coaching abilities by some of the top players in the team. And one of them, Estefania Banini, who for me was one of the revelations of the World Cup in 2019. She is not in the team right now because of some of those criticisms. There are other players there as well who some have retired from the national team. Others are just not being picked because of some of the outspoken criticism of the manager. It's this weird in between for me because it's not what we saw. I believe it was Mexico where they were in the similar kind of situation. They had the same manager in place for a long time, probably too long, and I don't know if it's just a lack of investment, a lack of trying to improve, whatever. That's part of it. But as we talked about, they tried to play, and they weren't just being negative, and it wasn't, about an outdated method of play to me. If it's time to change, it's time to change. And I think your pup agrees it's time to change for Argentina. And that's completely okay.
I thought we'd be worried about a baby causing problems, but right now we have a dog causing all sorts of problems.
But that's the conversation about the Argentine women's team right now. There's some problems, and it has to be addressed. Now's the time for them, because you need Bonini in this team. You need as much quality as possible. They need to take this tournament and, honestly, 2019 as a whole and that experience, and that needs to be the launching pad, because it feels like all the raw materials are there for Argentina to be a top team in South America and in this hemisphere.
100%. And the thing is, you can't underestimate the power that players have. When they're making these outspoken comments, they're saying it for a reason. They're potentially putting their careers on the line, and they have if they're not being selected for the team based on those comments. And the fact that they're willing to be that outspoken shows that there truly is an issue there. But the thing what's hard with that one, like you say, Jason, is they were playing the right style of soccer. They were doing the right things. So are those criticisms of the manager a little harsh if they are trying to develop the correct way?
Right. And that's what makes this so difficult. And I think maybe the nuance is a little lost to us as well, but I think it's been lost in the general conversation about this. I think it's far more complicated than any of us truly know. It is something they're going to have to address to get to that next level. If it's time for a new manager, if it's time for a new direction, they need to get their best players back in the fold, and they need to get this sorted out. Let's move on to Canada. Started promising, good performance against the U.S., but then they end up not really progressing from there. They struggled against Argentina. What did you learn about the Canadian team?
I think that's right, Jason. They sort of ran out of smoke. I was so impressed with how they battled against the US. They had some great opportunities. They defended well. The US had plenty of shots. They weren't clinical enough, but they did defend well, the Canadians. And I was really excited to see them push on with the rest of the tournament. I thought that, honestly, they were going to be able to shut things out and get a draw potentially against the US. The last 10-minute goal from Lavelle was the difference, but it was so disappointing how they then went on to play. The fact they struggled against Argentina, yes, we can compliment the Argentinian team for their game plan, but there's no way that Canada you would have expected to struggle. And then against Brazil were just the far better team yesterday. Canada didn't really offer anything. They might have had a couple of chances. I think what we learned there is they were missing a lot of players, but really that they haven't quite replaced that golden generation that they had that's coming to an end. And this World Cup, they're going to need to start to develop and play well together and be looking for who really is going to be the difference with this Canadian team.
It was the first tournament for Bev Priestman in charge of the program. They didn't have a full-strength team at all. They're tied for 8th with Brazil in the current FIFA World Rankings. I'd assume that'll change when the new rankings come out, I believe next month. Against top 10 teams in the current ranking, Canada in their last 10 matches, 0-8-2, and outscored 20-3 in that. Now, I know there's some games with the U.S., but that's a problem for Canada.
Yeah, and just those stats of how many goals they're scoring is a huge issue. They don't have anyone that's clinical enough in front of net, and that's what I would say with this tournament. They didn't have anyone that shone. They only scored 1 goal in the whole tournament. That's the same as Argentina did. They didn't have anyone there to really finish their chances. They were creating a few opportunities, but you can't win tournaments without goals.
Christine Sinclair cannot play forever. They're going to have to find somebody to score goals. The lack of progression was disappointing with Canada. On the Brazilian front, I think the way the tournament played out, they were given a difficult challenge early against Argentina. They ended up seeing that game out in style with a 4-1 win. They were second best to the U.S., which was expected with the levels between the two teams. But then they finished on a high note with a pretty strong win over Canada. Is Brazil back to where they were when they were getting to World Cup finals, or are they still a step or two off of that?
I still think they're a step or two off. I think they are playing well together, but you've got to remember with Brazil that they've got players that aren't going to be there very much longer. I was surprised to see Marta still playing. You've got Formiga, who obviously wasn't there this time around, but she's got to be in her 40s now. Mm-hmm. So they're about to lose the players that really make them who they are at the moment. Dabinia was fantastic. I enjoyed watching her play, and that's exciting that they have got some youngsters coming up, but they just need to be more consistent if they're truly going to challenge for World Cup finals. They played well against Canada. They gave Argentina a little bit too much in that first half for me. Yes, they won 4-1, but in the first half, they played equal to Argentina. And then obviously against the US, they were just second best. So I would say they have the building blocks, but they have to look at that second generation again. You point yourself to Marta's speech after the World Cup where she pleaded, she looked at that camera and pleaded directly to the next generation because she can't play forever, like you said about Sinclair. So the next few years are going to be pinnacle to see how they do replace, those stalwarts of the team.
The U.S. winning the tournament is not a surprise. I think even the way they won the tournament, not really a surprise. It was about what we expected. Maybe the Canada game was a little more difficult than we would have thought. But did we learn anything about the U.S. women's national team as they get ready for an Olympics here in a few months?
I mean, it's hard to learn so much when you are winning games pretty comfortably. If you watched yesterday's match, I don't know how much you can learn other than it was nice to see Rapinoe still in great strength. It doesn't look like she's going to be stepping down any time soon. I was excited to see Alex Morgan looking a lot fitter than she has done. Obviously, she had a baby pretty recently. She didn't get too much match time when, in her time in England. So that was good to see. The new players, there were a few people that maybe put in a bit of a competition, a pledge for a place. I would have liked to see Jane Campbell get some more competitive minutes in goal. I don't think we learned much about her. So I think we're going to need more competitive matches for the US. We talked about this with the Colombia friendlies. Yes, you can learn some about playing these teams, but if you're not in true competitive battles, how much can you truly learn about how these players are going to respond in tougher matches?
I guess the biggest storyline for me coming out of this is what the Olympic roster is going to look like. A World Cup roster like we saw in 2019 is 23 players. The Olympic roster is 18.
Oof, two of those that's a lot of cuts.
Yeah, and for some teams that won't be as hard as for others. I mean, for the U.S., 2 goalkeepers, so that leaves you with 16 field players that are going to go. And once you get past maybe half of that are locks, you're going to have some serious competition for spots. And even just from the last World Cup roster, not even looking at a player like Christy Mewis, who is maybe in the best form of her life, who, if the Olympics were tomorrow, I think she's there. I think it's hard to leave
consistent.
her home. Yeah, it's so tough. And that gives you the ability to play Julie Ertz in the back if you need to, because you could play the 2 Mewises in the midfield with a Lindsay Horan. Rose Lavelle, is Rose Lavelle able to start and play 90 minutes in a full Olympic tournament? I don't know. It's been a challenge, And
that's what's going to be in Andonovski's mind. He's got to think about players that can play 90 minutes, that can be consistent, and with how quick fire the matches are. It's tournament soccer all over again. It's not, you don't have long to recover between matches, and you don't want to bring someone that can't necessarily offer you 90 minutes week in, week out.
It's tough. I think Lavelle is such a game changer that you'll take her in that situation. But then when you look at the forward line, that's the one that you're not taking everybody from Alex Morgan, Tobin Heath, Kristen Press, Carly Lloyd, Lynn Williams, if you want to include Katerina Macario in the midfield and then that gets more complicated, or if she's a forward, okay, that's another one you're adding in. Jess McDonald, we didn't see her in this event. That's another one who's been part of the national team quite a bit. You can't take all of them. There's not enough room.
It's a good problem to have. When you have that much depth, it's a good problem to have. But you also got to think about, do you want to bring players that offer you different things? You don't want to bring 3 forwards that all play in a very similar style. Do you want a sort of holding, one that's comfortable holding the ball up? Do you want one that's more of a smash and bang kind of player? It depends on what angle they want to go down with that amount of players.
Yeah, it's tricky. I mean, the biggest thing that I think we've seen under Vlatko Andonovski is Christy Mewis's development, and the NWSL's had a big hand in that. She is back fully healthy. She's confident. She's a vital piece of this team, in my opinion, and she might get squeezed out of the roster just because of the size and because the midfield is so good. But she's become a player that Vlatko has leaned on a lot, and Lynn Williams is one that Vlatko has believed in from day one. And there's a lot of debate about Lynn Williams, and does she waste too many opportunities? I would argue she puts herself in place to create so many opportunities that
she should be finishing more.
She should be, but she's so different than the other forwards in this group. She's got speed that the others just don't have as much of. I didn't even mention Megan Rapinoe. I knew I was forgetting one, and Rapinoe's been so good now here lately too. But Rapinoe's not a speedster. Tobin Heath is great 1v1, but she's not getting in behind. Carly Lloyd's not getting in behind the back line. Lynn Williams is, and Lynn Williams might be wasting chances, but does she create enough to make up for that? I don't know.
And that's what we talk about when we look at the different dynamics that these players can bring. Maybe you want someone that gets in behind even if she's off the bench. You've had these players tire out. You've tired out the defenses, and then you're going to exploit them over the top. Or on the flip side, do you tire them out and then bring on a slower player? I think that she needs to work on her finishing, but that's something you can work on the training pitch. That's something that you can be getting lots of reps in. You can't teach speed.
No, you can't. And you also can't teach the size and power of Jess McDonald. But I think just not seeing her in this event, it's probably going to be difficult for her to make that roster unless she starts the NWSL season in great form. And that's going to be another element to Vlatko's decision-making. You're going to have the Challenge Cup starting in April. You're going to have the season starting in May. You'll have a few months before you finalize this roster. There could be a player or two that emerges out of the early portion of the season.
Yeah, 100%, and that's what's exciting, and it's the perfect real time for the NWSL season to begin because these players will be in great shape before the Olympics as well.
I have Shea Groom written down in pencil off to the side of this potential roster. If she plays like she did in the Challenge Cup last year, Shea Groom could be a huge shock, and if she scores the goal she did last year, you might need to find a way to take her one way or another.
It's just 18. It's such a small roster, and I wouldn't want to be in Andonovski's shoes right now.
It's difficult. It's going to be really difficult. Let's go big picture with this event that just finished up. The SheBelieves Cup is now 5 years in. This is the first time the U.S. has won it back-to-back. They were running a campaign at the time when they named the tournament. It made sense. The name is stuck. I don't think you're a big fan of it, though, are you?
It's a hard one for me because I understand the sentiment, right? And I understand where it was birthed from. And I think that at the time it was what was needed. It was needed that there was this tournament that was about inspiring the next generation, about teaching players that have young females that maybe have a lot to overcome when it comes to setting their way in the game of soccer, that maybe they had some challenges and that they can believe and that they can be inspired by these players on the pitch. I don't know if it's kind of ran its course at this point and now it starts to be kind of cringeworthy. And for me, I think what bothers me the most is by making it She Believes, you're kind of knocking off a whole audience that you want to have. I don't want this tournament just to be watched by young girls and be inspired. I want young boys to be inspired by watching the female game. I want grown men, grown women to watch these games because I want it to be seen that this tournament isn't just a gimmicky thing, that it's quality soccer that everyone can have enjoyment in. And I think that's what bothers me a little bit.
Yeah, we talked about this on SDH this morning, and I mean, it's a big conversation that's not going to be solved in a podcast, but I've always felt like soccer is soccer. And if it's the men playing, if it's the women playing, I don't care. It's the same game. The tactics are the same. The philosophies are the same. Nothing dramatically changes to me. And I feel like the women's game will benefit from being not separated.
Mm-hmm.
It needs to be part of the general conversation, just like we talked about with the other teams around the world. We need the bigger conversation about soccer and the women's game and just where it fits. Like the SheBelieves Cup sounds gimmicky, and maybe I'm assuming that's by design. Can they find another way to grow this event beyond the name of it? Because the event itself is the more important thing. It's become a good tournament for elite teams.
Yeah. And it's been exciting, and they're able to attract, lots of high quality teams. And this year they were still able to bring Argentina in last minute because of coronavirus. But in the past, you have had England coming to compete, and people take it seriously. They're not playing weak squads. They're using it as a chance to battle against some of the best. And I enjoy watching this tournament, and I like when the teams take it seriously, but there's still room for growth. And now, if you say 5 years in, you might look to expand it further.
The name feels a little like after school special to me. And I feel like maybe just a name befitting the level of the competition. And you can still do, and I know alongside the tournament in normal years and in non-COVID times, you have a lot of other initiatives going on around it. Still do that and still use the SheBelieves name in those. But maybe the cup and the tournament has a more... It's like I don't want to diminish it because I understand the concept behind naming it this way, but you hear like the Tournoi de France. It's just the French tournament, and it's seen as like, oh, okay, this is a big deal. I mean, even the Algarve Cup, which has been a big deal in the women's game. Like, what
I like about those ones is if you're a neutral and you don't know much about a tournament, you click on it because if you have those biases in you don't know what it is. You're interested by it, right? But there's people that have biases that will read SheBelieves Cup and will write it off immediately because they know what it is. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sadly, yes. And I hope that we get over that. And if changing the name to being, the old thing they did on the men's side, the US Cup, and if you don't want to recycle an old men's tournament and you want to come up with something along those lines, fine. Doing something that's more generic for the name, but having the soccer for social good components around it, I think can still work and be effective and give you the best of both worlds.
And you bring those kids as mascots that you want to inspire, but I also don't think there's an issue with having, like I say, having young boys. I think one of the biggest compliments to me when I was playing was when there were young boys that would come watch my Clayton State games because they were inspired by that. That's a big deal because they're seeing women's soccer as a normality and they're not comparing it. They're seeing it as worth what it is.
Exactly. I wore, when I played in intramurals at UGA, and I bought them specifically for the reason. I wore the boots that Mia Hamm wore because I loved Mia Hamm as a player. I would have loved to have had a quarter of the ability that Mia Hamm had. An incredible player, and you watched her at that time, and you wanted to play like her, whether you were male or female. So... yeah, I think maybe finding a new way to accomplish the goals of the SheBelieves Cup and initiative and all of that. Maybe it's time. We'll see. This kind of leads us to another topic, and this was a question from one of our listeners, and it referred to an article in The Guardian by Suzanne Rack. Anne Robotham asked the question to get your thoughts on the piece by Suzanne Rack at The Guardian. That was titled, England Women's All-White 11 Shines Light on a Deep-Rooted Problem. We've had this conversation, whether it's been through Soccer in the Streets. I think anybody involved in the game should be having these conversations. But what did you take out of the article in The Guardian and kind of your experiences with this?
I mean, firstly, I think it's so important that articles like this are written. England prides itself. We emphasize that we're a mixing pot and we're diverse. And if you can have a starting 11 that's purely white, then you have to look at what is going on because it's not representative of the country as a whole. Now, as I read this article, it immediately drew me back because they talk about how much more difficult it is for minorities to enter the game. And it drew me across to a completely different continent. But the time I spent in Colombia before coronavirus and getting to play over there and how rare it was for people to see females in the game. And when I spoke to my husband about that, he explained that culturally there are so many more barriers for Hispanic women who potentially have family members that don't see soccer as a place for women. They stereotype it as maybe being manly or being something that they don't want their daughters to play because of dangers and things like that. So from a big picture thing, sometimes you have to look at the barrier to entry and what is causing different minorities to maybe not even pick up their boots and start playing. But there's a whole other issue as well with once they do pick up their boots, what is the issue with the socioeconomics? What is the issue with the class? And both you and I, Jason, have worked with Soccer in the Streets, and we know that unfortunately soccer is becoming a more expensive sport. It's expensive to play. So when people can't play or they can't pay to play, then they're not going to get scouted to play at the national level. And I think that's becoming a progressive problem in England, which you wouldn't expect. You'd expect things to get better. But growing up for me, 20 years ago, you paid £2 to go play football. You paid £2, you paid your ref fees, and that was it. That was affordable for nearly everyone. Now, as the women's game grows, it's becoming more expensive because more clubs are being established, more elite clubs are being established. And unless you make it to the academies, which at least when I was young, there were no fees. You got your stuff for free as an honor of being part of the academy. But the step below that is now becoming more expensive. And maybe that's why the article states how the numbers of minority players included are now decreased. But what's concerning there is it's getting worse over time and not better.
Yeah, it's got to change, and that pricing is a really important element of this. And in the article, Rack pointed out from the Cabinet Office Race Disparity Audit, which was published in 2017, a few years ago, Asian and black households and those in the other ethnic group were more likely to be poor and were the most likely to be in persistent poverty. Around 1 in 4 children headed by people from an Asian background or those in the other ethnic groups were in persistent poverty, as were 1 in 5 children in black households and 1 in 10 in white British households. The game is getting more expensive to participate in, and that's worldwide. We talk about pay to play here all the time. It's not only here that you have these issues that are creeping up, and it is something that has to be addressed, I think, at the federation level in each country, but also I think it's something that FIFA and UEFA and CONCACAF and all the continental confederations have to address. And even further, it's something that people in the game have to take on as an initiative. And we're seeing a few, and people are working very hard to change these narratives, but it's going to take that work to change it.
Yeah, and I think the way you start that work, though, is by being open about it and talking about it and having these conversations. And unfortunately, we don't always recognize these issues. And, I was a middle class kid growing up, so I had it a lot easier with my access to the game. And I think when you realize that privilege, that's when you can start having those conversations and see how you can potentially help by raising awareness and doing something different.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think both of us came from kind of similar backgrounds in different countries, but both of us, I think, can also speak to the fact that how this game has made our lives more diverse and has brought people into our lives that are, not like us in that regard. And it can do that for others, but it has to be diverse for that to happen.
Mm-hmm. And I just hope that, what's so hard is that there are so many players that have so much ability that maybe go under the radar right now just because they don't have the access to be recruited. And I think that's one of the things when it comes to access levels. Unfortunately, a lot of scouts only go to games at big elite clubs. They don't go looking for players playing on the streets or playing, in their backyard or at really grassroots level as much. And that's where that barrier for entry, kids never necessarily get the opportunity to be looked at because they're not playing at that level that's being looked at.
It's not an easy answer to the question, to the topic as to, how do you fix it? It's going to take work, and it's going to take a lot of different people involved in it to make it work. And, I think if you've listened to, anything on SDH for any period of time, you kind of know how all of us feel about how soccer can be a unifier and how soccer can be a power for changing the world, making it a better place. So it's what we all believe in. It's what we'll all kind of fight for. And it's something that it's going to take all of us, you guys included who listen, to do that. It's going to take that. We have the opportunity to make the game better, and it's just going to take all of us to put in that effort to do it.
100%.
All right. It wouldn't be a show with you if we weren't talking goalkeeping. And I've got a couple of questions on the goalkeeper front, and we're going to start with Nathan Pugh's question. Nathan, if you don't know, is a huge Liverpool fan, so he's got a maybe unique angle on this one right now. Nathan said, being a keeper can be a lonely position, tragically punished for any mistake. How can keepers compartmentalize those things inside of a match? Alisson is an example. The recent howlers, the poor form, the constant changing of people that are playing on the back line. Also now, and it's horrible to hear, just the personal tragedy that he is going through. Mm-hmm. How do you – let's leave the big picture out of it for a second. You have the mistake that we've seen him make a couple of times on the pitch. You have a huge mistake. You cost your team. How do you put that out of your mind?
It's difficult. It's difficult, and it's something you kind of grow up learning to do, that you have to have. And one coach used to always tell me, you have to have a goldfish memory. You have to forget it happened, and you have to go on and continue the game. And mistakes early on in particular are the very hardest because you've got a whole 90 minutes ahead of you, but the way you need to do it is what I used to always pride myself in, is if you make a big mistake, you just have to make sure the next thing you do in that match is clean. So if you're mad at yourself because you've made that error, next time you come for that corner, you better get two hands on it and hold on to it tightly. And once you start to get those little touches, you start growing in confidence. I had one coach, and I did it for a while. It sounds crazy now thinking back to it, but I wore like a elastic band around my wrist. And if you made a mistake or you're disappointed with what you did, you would physically pull that elastic band and make it hit your wrist. And that would be it. That would be the little punishment mentally. And then it would be something you forgot about. And I used that early on in my college days because that pressure was so high on my shoulder. And it was almost nice to have that physical moment of knowing, okay, now it's over, on to the next one. But I think as a kid, and what I would tell my kids that I coached when I was a goalkeeper, and it would be that cliche that, you know what, it had to get past 10 other players before it got past me. No matter how bad your mistake is, there was someone in that position that was able to score or able to create an opportunity because they got past the rest of your teammates. So as a youngster, at least, that's what I used to always reiterate to my players.
We haven't talked about it very much, but the first position I played was goalkeeper. And as a kid at the YMCA in Clayton County, the first year I played almost exclusively goalkeeper when I was 9. And I loved it. I mean, I'd never played soccer before, so I guess they threw the new kid into goal because I'd played other sports and had hand-eye coordination. I don't know.
And you get the full game time. That was the best part about being in goal as a kid. You never had to worry about being subbed.
It was great. That first year I did that in the spring, and then that summer I watched the World Cup and decided I wanted to be Diego Maradona and wanted to play on the field. So then, because I was pretty good at goalkeeper as a 9-year-old. I stayed in goal like half the game and I'd play on the field half the game. But what you just said about that whole idea about it has to get through everybody else to get to you, that is the one thing that I'll always remember my first coach saying to me at goalkeeper when I would get down on myself if I didn't make a save. It had to get through everybody else. And then also if the team started to kind of fall apart because of that, that was what he would say to the team as well.
Yeah, because that's the mentality you have to change. Honestly, goalkeepers have to have, they say they're crazy, and I think you must have to be to put yourself through that loneliness. You're right. That word loneliness, it's different. You train separately from your team. You have a different responsibility to your team. Once you're on that 11-a-side pitch, you'll never understand how big and lonely an 18-yard box can feel until you're in it. But you have to understand as a field player that if you can't do it, keep your mouth shut. Like, that sounds awful, but that was one of my biggest things to my defenders. And they knew me. They knew I wouldn't take no crap from them. If they turned around and said something to me, I would tell them, well, why don't you do it then? Yep. Because there's no one else that can do it bar a goalkeeper.
It made me a better player. I think it helped me understand the game faster as a kid to play goalkeeper. And I would absolutely recommend it to anybody who has kids who are under the age of 12. I mean, even up to that age, like before you start getting uber competitive, have your child play some goalkeeper.
The vision, it's the different perspective you get from being behind the whole field of play. And I think that's why I feel so comfortable commentating as well, because I have viewed the game kind of from that angle my whole life, not from a halfway line position, but I viewed it from, the back, and I see how the different pieces work. And that's something that's invaluable for kids. And like you say, Jason, it makes them a better team player too, because they appreciate how difficult it can be to be in goal.
Yeah, it's almost like you become more empathetic and you understand what that role really truly entails, because it can be lonely. And this takes it to the bigger picture with Allison is, okay, you have it happen once, you have a howler, you have a huge mistake. It will happen to anybody. It'll happen to the best goalkeeper in the world. But then it happens a couple of times. Then it starts to become a trend. How do you get out of that? How do you regain confidence?
I think you need your team around you, and you need a great coach around you, and you need to be encouraged. The worst thing you can do, and I know there's people calling for it, and they call pretty quickly for goalkeepers' heads, but the worst thing you can do is drop a goalkeeper in that stage, because that's like kicking someone while you're down. And you get the pundits that criticize coaches that take off a sub when they're already subbed on. We saw that happen on the weekend as well. But the same thing's for a goalkeeper. If you kick them while they're down, you don't let them find their rhythm themselves and get back in the game, then that's tough. I think you need the mental support of your teammates. You need to see that your defenders trust you. And like I say, you need a big save. You need one big save that makes you believe in yourself more, and the trust of your teammates behind you.
It's such a weird mentality, I think. And that's why, I agree that goalkeepers are crazy. And I played goalkeeper enough to recognize that I was crazy to do it. I was crazy to play it, and whenever I played it, because you have to be willing to take on this challenge, because it's a different challenge than any other player on the field.
I don't think I barely enjoyed a minute of my whole career playing competitively. Enjoyed. It's a strange way to think about it. I loved the competitiveness, and I loved what I did, and I loved that thrill, but enjoyment is a different thing. I don't think you can have the same enjoyment or flair on the pitch, because you're constantly under pressure, and you have to learn to love that pressure, but I don't think you enjoy the game in the same way.
If you play it like Manuel Neuer, maybe, because there's a few things that he does that it seems like he really enjoys. He blows my mind at times with the way he's kind of reinventing the goalkeeper position. It's just incredible to watch. And for me, when he's done, he goes down as maybe the greatest, or maybe at least the most influential goalkeeper of all time.
I think influential is the biggest word, and changing the style of play. And we talked about that on the last pod, how goalkeeping is changing. And he's definitely a figurehead of that transition.
So we'll finish with this question from Patrick Delaney. As someone who's still learning the more technical aspects of the game, what are some of the things to look for in a goalie's performance? So if you're going to give the classic 1 to 10 rating on how a game goes and how the players do, what are you judging the goalkeeper on?
That's a great question. I love that. So if I had a scorecard, I think you would have communication as a huge one, because communication, even if you don't have a busy game, the communication is key with the back line. And oftentimes the reason a goalkeeper doesn't have a busy game is because their communication has been so top notch that they've enabled their defense to do the big stuff. So I put communication on there 100%. Nowadays with the modern goalkeeper, and it seems appropriate that we bring that up, you got to talk about their footwork and their distribution, because that's key. Now, that doesn't just mean the pretty style playing out the back, the big picture distribution. Did they release the ball quick enough? Did they go long at the right times? It's about finding that right balance between playing short, going long, finding the right player, making the right choices. I would say commanding the 6-yard box. We talk about the 18-yard box, but that 6-yard box is where the goalkeeper really has to own everything. If you have a goalkeeper that's not coming for stuff in their 6-yard box, then that's not a great performance, because that means they haven't been dominating that area that really is their own, that's theirs to own. Shot stopping, look, shot stopping is the bread and butter, obviously, but 99% of goalkeepers are very good shot stoppers. It's the other stuff. So a lot of the time with shot stopping, I just want to know, has the goalkeeper saved everything that you would expect them to save? Right. The bigger stuff, it's helpful, but it's about the clean, consistent stuff. Have they saved everything that you would expect them to save? Have they been beating the near post? Then there's an issue. Have they been, slow to react? Then there's an issue. So those are my big ones. And I would say positioning as well, because again, it kind of links with the communication. If a goalkeeper has good positioning, they often don't have to make the big saves, because their positioning is what allows them to come pick things up on the edge of the box instead of being in a one-on-one position. The positioning is what allows them to come clear something with their feet instead of having a forward charging them down. So that's what I would say are my top ones. Like I say, shot stopping is important, but I think so much of our energy with goalkeepers is put on shot stopping and big saves that you forget the other things that make an all-rounded goalkeeper.
See, that gives me a better idea of judging a goalkeeper's performance, because I think the easy thing is, did they make a big save or did they make a big mistake? And that's normally how these things get graded. I do think there is a component to that goalkeeper who is better than most in shot stopping, the one who will make that back-breaking kind of save. And like Bill Hamid is one that I think of in that regard, where he seems like against Atlanta typically will have that kind of day where he makes a save that deflates the other team. Yeah, it's
and you as a commentator are speechless and you're right. The word deflate is so key there, because I used to love when I could tell that I'd got in a forward's head. And there's sometimes if you make one of those saves where they were already reeling off to celebrate. It's that kind of save where the forward is already planning to run to the corner flag to do their knee slide. When you pull out that save, then you've got in their head and you've won that battle.
Hamid at Bobby Dodd in 2017 is one of those games where I think he won the game, and not just because of the number of saves he made, but some of the quality of the saves he made. I think he won that match for DC against Atlanta. I think of Casey Keller in the Gold Cup in 1998 against Brazil, where, he even had Romario from Brazil shake his hand after a save, which you don't see very often. It was so ridiculous. That's something that maybe at times in our judging of goalkeepers gets overplayed, but there are some that do take it to that next level where it's just, you can watch the life go out of an attacker. I can't beat this guy.
I think you're right. It's those big games where they've made consistent saves, game-changing saves are vital. But like you say, I think sometimes there's too much emphasis on the saving is all they do. Right. That's not the only thing that's important about a goalkeeper, because you can make great saves, but if your defense don't trust you, then you're in a bad position there.
No, that's perfect. You nailed it with that. And commanding the 6-yard box is such an important element that doesn't get talked about enough. I'll give you one bonus question. Who is that goalkeeper in the women's game right now that you think is that shot stopper that can deflate the opponent?
Look, this is going to sound crazy, and I'm going to have to tweet her to let her know that I spoke about her. But Grace Maloney, who is an Irish international, and she's Reading's goalkeeper right now. Mm-hmm. She had the pundits going crazy after their win against, who did they beat? Man United, right?
Oh, yeah. No, I remember that. She had that kind of performance.
That kind of performance where they were just like, when you have the opposition manager talking about you in the post-match interview, you know you've done well. And what's good about Grace is she has a few rushes of blood to her head, but she's fearless. And that's where the strikers are like, oh my goodness. She puts her head where you don't expect other players to put their head. And she's cracking right now. And, you know, she's an Irish international, and I hope she gets an opportunity to continue to thrive.
That's very cool. Yeah, that was one of those games. That's a really good shout, because I remember watching that, like, she just can't be beaten today.
There was a save that the commentators literally thought was a corner and thought it was a goal kick, because it was that much of like an intricate deflection that was such a game changer. And those are the ones that used to always excite me, when you knew you'd had a touch on it, but even the linesmen and stuff didn't notice it because it was so subtle but so important in the save. Those were some of my favorites. And you would just take that goal kick smiling. You'd be like, I know I saved that, but I'll take the goal kick.
That's awesome. Great questions from you guys out there listening. Thank you. And we try to incorporate some questions every show, sometimes more than others. Today we had a bunch of stuff to break down with She Believes. Jess, it's always fun to dig into not just like, this is the game, this is what happened in this game, but some of the big picture things just around the game as a whole. And, you know, I mentioned this on SDH, and I've told you this many times, and, you know, we try very hard to make sure on this show that it is not the women's soccer show with Jess. It is the soccer show starring Jess, because you talk about the men's game, the women's game, all of it, because we try to incorporate everything. That's how all of it grows, right?
I just talk footy, Jason. I just talk footy.
Exactly. Like, it's not, you know, only the women's game, and we talk about the women's game on SDH, and we try to talk about it more, and the game is the game is the game. That's all. We all love this game, no matter who's playing it and where it's being played.